Will God be the master of ourselves as we become the servants of others? Take our minds and think through them, our lips and speak through them, and take our hearts and set them on fire. Amen. The local sheriff was advertising for a new position for a deputy, and several people applied, including one guy who, well, we'll just say that he wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. And so when he came in for the interview, the sheriff wanted to kind of weed him out a little bit, and so he said, okay, what is 1 and 1? The guy thought about it, and he said, 11. So the sheriff thought about it, and he said, well, that wasn't really what I had in mind, but all right, I guess he is right. So he said, all right, how many days of the week start with the letter T? And the guy said 2. The sheriff thought a little bit about that, and then he said, today and tomorrow. Well, again, he said he was right, but not exactly what he thought of. So the sheriff said, all right, now listen carefully. He said, who killed Abraham Lincoln? So the guy was a little surprised by that, and he thought about it really hard, and thought about it, and tried to think about it, and he said, well, I don't know. And so the sheriff said, well, okay, why don't you go home and think about it for a while? So the guy left. Went over to his friend's house, and he was all excited. He comes in the door, and the friend was there waiting to find out whether the guy got the job or not. He came in and said, well, did you get the job? He said, it's a shoo-in. So I so impressed him so much that on my first day of the job, I got a murder case. In our gospel reading this morning, it's Jesus' first day on the job. It's right after his baptism in the Jordan River by his cousin John. Now a lot of people, when they have a person in their family being baptized, when they're baptized, or when they have a child baptized, they have a baptism party afterwards. And that's a good thing. It's a great thing to celebrate. I encourage parents, in fact, to kind of treat it as a second birthday party. And I remember that when I was baptized as an adult, I was not raised in church, so I was not baptized as a child. I didn't get baptized until I was in college, and I was baptized by immersion in a little tiny Christian Missionary Alliance church on a Sunday evening in February, as a matter of fact. And afterwards, some of my friends came to the baptism, and then afterwards, I got taken out to Dairy Queen. So it's a good thing to do to have that, but Jesus, not so much. Instead of getting a peanut butter parfait, what Jesus got was driven out into the desert for 40 days fasting with only wild animals for company. And on top of all that, as he's out there, he gets tempted by the Satan, the adversary, the enemy. Happy Baptism Day, Jesus. So this is the first Sunday in Lent. Lent is the season of 40 days, not counting Sundays, to prepare us for Easter. And it's a time of in-depth reflection on the passion and death of Jesus, as well as a period of repentance for both the church and for us personally as we go on this journey. And so this year, we're going to look at Lent, at least up until Passion Palm Sunday, and the entire season of Lent as a journey, as a trip, as a road leading up to Jesus' passion, his arrest, his trial, his crucifixion, his burial, and ultimately his resurrection on the empty tomb. It's a long trip, and it's not always going to be comfortable. But it's a journey that can shape our identities and help us to become more faithful apprentices of Jesus. And as I was putting this together during Lent, trying to come up with sort of a thematic theme to kind of tie it all together, I'm calling it The Long and Winding Road. That's not just because I'm a Beatles fan, although it is that. If I could tie that in, that's always good. But it has totally something to do with it. It's called that because the trip with Jesus is definitely long and winding. And at times, it's uncomfortable. And it's hard. In the Lenten study that several of us are doing, the Rebel Jesus. We saw this past week that the fastest growing religious preference in America, especially among those 30 and younger, is no preference, no religion. And one of the key reasons that people, and especially young people under 30, are dropping out of the Christian faith, as well as faith in general, but dropping out of the Christian faith is we have dumbed down what it means to follow Jesus. We made it easy and comfortable and all about making us happy. That's why people do, we've got such a consumerist mindset that people just go hopping from one place to another because they're looking for something that will make them happy. And Jesus becomes kind of like Mr. Rogers. He's safe, he's kind, he's gentle, and he's bland in the way that we present him. You almost expect him to come and put on a cardigan and change his shoes. See, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. But this is a hard road. It's hard to follow Jesus. And I'm reminded of the El Camino de Santiago de Compostela, the Way of St. James. This is a pilgrimage that was made popular in the recent movie, The Way, starring Martin Sheen and directed by his son, Emilio Estevez. If you haven't seen the movie The Way, I highly encourage that. Maybe that'd be a good thing to do for your own Lenten journey, is to watch this movie sometime during Lent. El Camino de Santiago de Compostela is a network of routes across Spain and Europe, and all leading to the Santiago de Compostela in the northwest of Spain. In the Middle Ages, these routes were walked as a pilgrimage to the tomb of the Apostle St. James. And nowadays, tens of thousands of people walk or bicycle the Camino de Santiago every year, and it's a journey of 500 miles. People from all over the world with all kinds of motivations. They do it for exercise, or they do it for the culture, or they do it for religious reasons, or for getting out into nature, or just to have the adventure of doing it, or for whatever reason that they walk or bicycle this 500-mile road. Travel the El Camino de Santiago, or parts of it, it becomes a lifetime experience. And for centuries, ever since almost the beginning of Christianity, many pilgrims have followed St. James' footsteps across Spain until the place where he was eventually martyred and buried. And they still continue to arrive in Santiago de Compostela. According to the website of the El Camino, Camino de Santiago means freedom, culture, sport, nature, tradition, challenge, peace, but above all, it's freedom. Numerous emperors like Charlemagne, popes like Calixtus II, kings like Alfonso II, brave knights like the Spanish El Cid or the Knights Templar, noblemen, thousands of priests, farmers, beggars, travelers, the healthy, the sick, the blind, the lame, the rich, and the homeless, all of them were pilgrims in El Camino de Santiago. And all of them were treated the same because no one knew if the dirty, tired, and blistered pilgrim that just arrived in the village before sunset was a king, a bishop, or a pauper. They were and still are all pilgrims, always looking for something, always bringing new ideas. In the movie The Way, and we're going to see a clip from that in just a second. In the movie The Way, Tom Avery, who is played by Martin Sheen, has had a strained relationship with his son, Danny, who's played by Emilio Estevez, who also directed the movie. And Tom gets a call one day that his son, Danny, has died in the French Pyrenees as he was walking on the El Camino de Santiago. And so Tom goes over to pick up his son's body. And he realizes that he had not talked to his son in years. And the last time that they had talked, they'd had a fight. And he starts to wonder about what it is that would make his son drop out of college and walk on this El Camino de Santiago. So he decides to have his son cremated and then to finish the pilgrimage that Danny started and was never able to finish. He meets several other fellow pilgrims, including Sarah Eustace, and Jack, who are all traveling for different reasons. Along that 500-mile walk, they come to different but very powerful times of self-discovery and spiritual growth. Sound familiar? Our Lenten journey begins this year, as it does every year, with the temptations of Christ. At the beginning of his ministry, Jesus spent 40 days and 40 nights in the desert in order to be in communion with God and to reflect on his upcoming ministry. And while he's there, Satan confronts Jesus. And it's a reminder to us that goodness is not the same as innocence. True goodness comes only after the struggle with evil. And Mark doesn't give us a lot of details of the temptations. In order to do that, we have to pick up from Matthew and Luke what those details were. But Jesus is tempted to use power for the wrong reasons. He wants Jesus to take the crown without the cross. And Jesus is tempted to take the easy way. But following Jesus isn't easy. I mentioned earlier that last week, 21 Coptic Christians were executed, martyred. ISIS paid them the greatest compliment that they ever could have, without even realizing it. They called them the people of the cross. Have you seen the response of Coptic Christians to what's happened? First of all, the brother of one of the martyrs thanked ISIS for putting on the video as the people were calling out to Jesus. Secondly, there was a picture just this past week of Coptic Christians protecting their Muslim neighbors, realizing, of course, that ISIS are not real Muslims. They're wackos. They're crazy people. They're evil. Real Muslims are not like that. But this is Arab Spring going on. It's sort of a similar thing to Lent in the Muslim world. And some Muslims were there in the Coptic areas of Egypt, were praying, and they were surrounded by their Coptic Christian neighbors who were joined hands, protecting them as they prayed. See, this is what people of the cross look like when they're persecuted. They mimic the nonviolent, self-sacrificial nature of the one who went to the cross for us. That's not easy, but it is the way of Jesus. Jesus is tempted to get popularity by performance. The Satan asks, wouldn't you rather avoid the long way to accomplishing your goal? Wouldn't you rather avoid the path that requires patience? Wouldn't you rather bypass suffering? Wouldn't you rather take the crown without the cross? We can't avoid the desert. We can't avoid walking the long and winding road with Jesus if we're going to follow him. In order to get to the empty tomb of Easter, Jesus had to walk the road to the cross of Good Friday. There's no avoiding it. There is no resurrection without a crucifixion. I've known a lot of people over the years who've wanted to play musical instruments, but they give up because the road of practicing is too hard. They just want to learn how to play it. They don't want to do anything like practice it. Because practicing isn't always fun. But if you want to be a musician, you've got to walk that road. You've got to take the time to practice, to do all those scales, to do all those exercises, all those things that nobody likes to do in order to have the freedom to be a musician. We've often turned the church into an amusement park. I've seen churches with kids' play areas that are like you see at McDonald's, coffee shops and bookstores, worship times that are more like concerts with a guest motivational speaker, and no mention of the cross. Oftentimes, not even a cross they don't even call it a sanctuary, in the worship space or in the auditorium. Following Jesus isn't always fun. But it does lead to an abundant life. Not just up in the clouds when we die. That's not the point of what Jesus was saying, but right here in this life, in this world. Jesus was tempted to serve the wrong master. Jesus was tempted to bow to the power and the prestige of the world. And there's a difference between power and authority. And this was seen in no greater way than in two funerals that took place in 1997. in the same week. In that same week, towards the end of August of 1997, Princess Diana and Mother Teresa both died. Diana represented wealth and power and beauty and popularity, and in so many ways, that's what killed her. She had a constant struggle with depression and eating disorders, and it finally was driven to her death by a drunk driver trying to get away from the paparazzi. And the world mourned. But later on that same week, Mother Teresa, who was poor, living in the worst part of one of the poorest places on earth, surrounded every day by poverty and disease and death, and was yet joyful and fulfilled. She had her times of doubt, but who wouldn't? Now, I'm not trying to judge Diana, but to show that she had power. But Mother Teresa had authority. Her authority came from following the way of Jesus and serving the right master. So the crucial question this morning is, what does all this mean for us? The ultimate temptation of Jesus was that he could have a crown without a cross. And that's the temptation that we as his followers are facing also. We want power without painful rejection. We want risk with no danger. We want victory with limited commitment. And some Christians say that to be a Christian means that life is all beautiful and everything is hunky-dory and goes the way you want it to all the time. But it strikes me that the temptation of Christ is saying something very different. It's saying that life is a struggle. Life is a wilderness experience, and you will be tempted by evil. So I remind you today that in those times when you're in the desert and you're trying to find your way through, and when temptation comes and offers you the wrong answer, the wrong choice, the wrong use of power, the way to popularity, the wrong kind of partnership, then remember that Jesus walks this way also. And like Tom Avery in the movie, we meet others on this same way. Maybe with different reasons for walking it. Maybe we're each looking for something a little different along that road. And maybe we're at different points on this long and winding road. But our destination is the same. We walk the way of the cross in companionship with Jesus and with each other. Through the garden and the cross and the tomb, heading for the resurrection. It's time to get started.